Searching for greener pastures or perhaps greener metals, Australians have become increasingly intrigued by the North American markets. As mining.com.au continues to explore the curious case of Canada, we welcome CEO of TSX-V listed Clean Air Metals Jim Gallagher. Jim, great to have you with us.
Yeah, great to be here today and looking forward to reaching a new audience.
The company was formed when Stephen Stair's Benton Resources saw an opportunity that others may have overlooked. Talk to us about how the company came to acquire your Thunder Bay North Critical Minerals project.
Yeah, great question. These are two long explored assets that are adjacent to each other, but historically have been in different hands. And one was discovered by a company called Magna Resources, which in fact was acquired more than a decade ago by Panoramic Resources of Australia. Panoramic Resources did extensive diamond drilling on the current resource. And adjacent to that, 2.5 kilometers away, and what we now know today comes from the same feeder system and the same genesis period, is what we call the Escape deposit. That was actually discovered by Rio Tinto. So another name all miners are familiar with. And it actually came into their fold when they acquired Kennecott. Kennecott apparently was looking for diamonds in this part of northern Ontario. And Rio Tinto put a couple of holes into an interesting magnetic anomaly, discovered 90 plus meters of some very nice platinum, palladium, nickel, copper. But it wasn't what they were looking for. They didn't think it was going to be that Rio Tinto generational size deposit. And it was on the shelf, not being actively pursued. Panoramic had sort of retreated and pulled out of Canada, left a small office behind, which quite frankly, we have acquired and own today. And it was Stephen Stair's and Benton Resources. These guys are explorers, project generators. He had personal relationships. He knew the history of both deposits. Some people had forgotten about them. And he approached both companies and said, are you interested in selling? And it makes sense to pull them together into one. They're essentially coming from the same source. And he managed to pull that deal together in 2019, leading into 2020. And in 2020, I got recruited in the deal very early on. And myself and others pulled a shell company out of Toronto, actually, and returned that as Clean Air Metals on the market, pulling these two assets together. Within the first week, we raised $15 million and then another 6.5 through what Canada has in the flow-through shares. And we were well cashed up in early 2020, right at the start of COVID. Great time to start a new company. And started Clean Air Metals. And that's how it all came together.
And the project has a suite of critical metals, including platinum and palladium, which interestingly enough have a 1-to-1 ratio. Why is this significant, Jim?
Yeah, so platinum, palladium, copper, and nickel. And actually at today's prices, platinum, palladium, copper are almost the same revenue source. I think the importance here is that platinum and palladium are incredibly rare primary mining metals outside of Africa and especially South Africa. And I think that's the key. There are only two known to me primary palladium mines in the world. One was my old stomping grounds, which is just north of this deposit. Part of the reason I got recruited I was CEO of North American Palladium when it got sold to Impala Platinum. And that's one. And the other one is Stillwater in Montana in the USA. And that is now owned by Sibanye. So the South Africans several years ago came into Canada and picked up these platinum palladium resources. Platinum's a key story here because it is very rare. It's even rarer than palladium. And the only primary mines in the world are in South Africa. So we have the chance of being the only primary platinum mine in the world. If we get this thing built, and I think we're waiting on quite a significant price uptake on the metal.
Speaking of significance, the company announced the downplunge potential of the Escape deposit. What opportunities might this open up?
Yeah, so look, Northern Ontario, the South African deposits are reef deposits. Lake sediment settles out and creates the deposits that they mine today in South Africa. The Canadian deposits are sulfide magmatic intrusion. That means hot metal injected from depth. And that is generally the story in the Canadian mining market, and certainly in Northern Ontario, where this deposit is. And so they all come from depth. I'm in the Sudbury Basin today, historical huge mining district for nickel, copper, and lots of precious metals as byproducts. And the average mining depth today is probably approaching 2,000 meters here in the Sudbury Basin. So these things come from depth. These two deposits have basically only been explored down to 500 meters. And I think it's the founding companies were looking more initially at open pit, and actually the first study ever done was as an open pit. And so they really didn't concentrate on going deeper. Some of these deposits, when they get into a big embayment and the flows of this magma slow down, that's when you get the heavier metal settling out. So there's huge potential below 500 meters, and we've only just started planning that exploration program today.
It was a tough market for some metals last year, Jim. Nothing you haven't seen before. You facilitated the $1 billion sale of North American palladium in 2019. How confident are you in the quality of Thunder Bay and the market fundamentals of the suite of commodities it's enriched with?
Yeah, so great question. Look, we've done a couple of rounds of studies on this deposit. We had this historical database. Of course, we've added over 100,000 meters of drill hole, but historically, there's significantly more was done. All of that has actually gone through two processes of reviews with qualified geologists, QPs. We've published an updated resource in May of this year. So the resource itself, very solid, very well drilled, much of it at 25 meter centers. So incredibly well drilled deposit, great confidence in what we have in the ground. I think on the other side, on the market side, the story of copper and nickel, I think, is well known as one of these green energy things that we're going to electrify everything in the world. Copper obviously has a huge market. Palladium and platinum less understood. Palladium has always played a big role in car emissions, catalytic converters. The auto market has actually come off by 25% since COVID started, and it hasn't rebounded. And that's actually more of the reason that the palladium prices come down than even electric cars, although electric cars have taken a little bite of that market. The big story, I think, is in the future of platinum, which is very, very tightly tied to the whole green hydrogen story. Producing green hydrogen to solve the problems of heavy industry, steel industry, cement, heavy transportation, planes. Hydrogen is a big part of that story. Producing green hydrogen, the anode and cathode, when you run electricity through water, are coated with platinum. It improves the efficiency of the process, and it's very resistant to corrosion. And then, of course, in fuel cells, that primary median down the middle is also very heavy in platinum. So there's a huge potential market coming for platinum. Metal markets have come off because of global commodity issues, global economy issues. I think we see a super cycle in metals coming, and it's going to be a hard wall to hit when that happens. So we're pretty bullish on the suite of metals, in particular, platinum.
Could Clean Air's project be the next primary producing palladium platinum operation? And what work will the company need to undertake to help make that a reality?
Well, we talked about the down plunge exploration. We've got some really good geophysical targets. We're refining that now. We expect to be drilling later this year on those two targets, the geophysical targets. So that's a huge part of it. We're going to continue some of the technical studies. We've done 2 rounds of metallurgy. It's very near the surface. So we're pretty comfortable. We've got a good deposit, and I think we're just going to add some scale to it. We sit at about 14 million tons today. About 2.4 million, equivalent ounces of platinum on an equivalence basis. So that's part of the story. The other part of the story is throughout northwestern Ontario, and which is a massive area, several hundred kilometers by several hundred kilometers, huge number of platinum, palladium, nickel, copper type showings. And many of those are distressed. There's opportunity in that market now. We're going to leverage some of our expertise to see if we can pick up some other somewhat distressed assets that don't have the technical or financial resources to move forward. and combine that with the story around Thunder Bay North as our kind of our cornerstone. So pretty active area and a pretty interesting time. We think we're going to turn these tough markets into an opportunity by looking for other assets.
Finally, Jim, I understand that you've appointed someone to the board recently who is an Aussie geologist. What can you tell us?
Yeah, we've appointed Dr. David Peck. Dave is a longtime associate of mine. We worked together at North American Palladium. He has traveled the world and worked the world for Anglo, for North American Palladium, for a number of institutes. He's actually not an Australian. He is a Canadian, but he did get his PhD at the University of Melbourne. So it's part of his global travels. And Dave's agreed to join our board with our own Dr. Jeff Hagee, who's our VP of Exploration. We have two of the world experts, quite frankly, on platinum, palladium, nickel, copper type of occurrences. And they both have extensive experience in Northwestern Ontario. So we're going to stay focused kind of in our backyard for the time being. So we think Dave's a great addition to the team to kind of oversee and challenge the team from the board level.
That was CEO of TSX-V listed Clean Air Metals Jim Gallagher.